Hey, you need an SE process. Doesn't matter the size of the company. You need an SE process. I repeat, you need an SE process. What's up, SE Nation? Ramsey here. So last week I made the case of why every company needs sales engineers. I think sales engineers are the most valuable people in a sales organization, and I know I'm biased. Everybody's valuable, but SEs are overlooked. And today specifically, I want to talk about the back-end SE process. Some of the things that we need to build for sales engineers to actually add value to the team. Because if you hire a sales engineer and there is no process and they're left to their own devices, they're not going to be as valuable. You're not setting them up for success. So I wanted to talk about building an SE process, the back end of the SE process right now. Now, the actual process in itself might change from company to company, but here's what we need to think about. Number one is assignment of opportunities. There are different ways of assigning opportunities to sales engineers. Some sales engineers are tied to specific account managers or account executives, and they're assigned to those whatever opportunity those account managers are working. But on the other hand, you have the pooled SE model, which I'm not a really big fan of, but I understand when you're just starting out, it's sometimes difficult to hire a lot of sales engineers to match the sales people. So what ends up happening is you have 1 or 2 or 3 SEs covering a large territory, at which point the assignment of the sales engineer to an opportunity is something that really needs to be looked at. And what I'm talking about specifically is you can send an email and say, like, hey, give me an SE, and you can send it their way. Or if there are tools out there that you might be able to use. But more importantly is when do SEs get assigned? If there's one SE covering 10 salespeople, they're asked to join on every opportunity for every call, then that SE is going to leave the company pretty quickly. They're not going to have time. On the other hand, I've seen this with multiple startups where an SE gets involved in the implementation phase. Like, hey, we already did all the work. They just bought, go implement it for them. At this point, you don't have an SE, you have an implementations engineer. Or when you're working as like the POC, SEs get involved in the POC, and now the SE has to figure out how am I supposed to manage this POC? What are the go, no-go criteria? What are the milestones we're trying to achieve? Then the SE is basically rendered useless. As I mentioned earlier, they won't be as valuable to the company as when you have a good process. So at which point do you assign SE to an opportunity? What are the information that they are required to have before they join the opportunity? Are they joining at discovery call? Are they joining at the demo? Are they doing a disco demo, or are they just showing the product? So first thing you need to do is figure out how you're going to assign an SE to an opportunity. Number 2 process that needs to be discussed is the transfer of information. Startup founders are involved in every aspect of the organization, from product building to the demo, to the sale, to the close, to the negotiation. They're involved in all of it. At some point, if the company grows enough, which hopefully it does, you would have to actually transfer that information that the CEO has, that the founder, that the product team has, to the sales team. And a lot of large organizations have that. I don't think a lot of them have that in a very good way, but nonetheless, they have that. So what is the process that you're going to get the information from the product team to the sales engineering team? Who's going to be responsible for building the battle cards, the competitor information? Where's all that information going to land? It doesn't have to be a complex system. I see a lot of companies use HighSpot, and I talk to sales engineers and salespeople never use HighSpot. They have to be reminded about it all the time. That's just an example. It could be SharePoint, it could be Confluence, as long as it's one space, one spot that SEs know they can go to, or salespeople for that matter, know they can go to get that information, and to get it in a way that they can actually help sell. There's always a disconnect between product and sales, where the product are always talking about that product, the features, and never about how to sell it and what value brings to the company, what are the questions to ask. That will be useful. For the transfer information, you need to figure out where it's going to be, who's going to do it, and the format of how it's done. I'm a big fan of practice sessions, role play with the account management team, between the product team and the sales engineering team and the account management team. So the product knows the product. The sales team knows the sales process and knows how to sell the product. So if they collaborate together, it could work very well. And the third thing to consider is RFPs. What is the process? I know in startups, it's always enticing to respond to everything, every request. And this could be a formal RFP or just a question by someone. What is the process for RFPs? If you're responding to every single RFP, you might not actually have time to do work. I mean, hopefully you're in that situation. If you're not in that situation, then don't worry. But if you're in a position to respond to every RFP, should you? What is the minimum requirement to respond to RFPs? Sometimes customers just want someone to, as column pot, people to submit their RFPs just so they can say like, hey, we asked 3 vendors to submit their RFPs. So what is it that you need to be able to submit an RFP, answer, or respond to the request for proposal? These are the things to think about. What is the process? Who's going to respond to RFPs? In startups, it could be anybody. In larger companies, many times it's SEs. But I don't think that's the best job for an SE. 1, SEs hate it. I don't think anybody loves it either, but they're an expensive resource. 2, there are much better people, copywriters, for example, who are able to respond to RFPs. Someone who can figure out the technology and just answer questions. They don't have to be technical in depth. They just have to be able to answer technical questions. Or are you going to use a tool like LoopQ or any other RFP automation tool? There are a lot of tools out there. So whether it's a startup or a large company, that's something to understand. In my world, I have a process. If someone sends me a RFP on Friday afternoon, asking it for Friday afternoon, I know that I am not in consideration for the running. And I insist on jumping on a call so I know how to respond to RFPs, because RFPs are vague and usually written by the competition. I need to understand a little bit more, and that's my process. What would be your process? That's something else to think about. And now we're moving a little bit more into like some of the things that happen during the sale, but still on the back end, which, for example, it's the scoping process when working with an implementation team. I work with some startups, some SEs, who are stuck doing scoping for something they don't really understand. When you ask an SE to do scoping, it's like a nephrologist how to put together a dialysis machine. A nephrologist, by the way, is a kidney doctor. I had to look it up. But you're basically asking a doctor how to put a machine together. That's not our job. Sales engineers don't know the exact steps they need to do to actually implement something, but we know how it solves a problem. We know how to talk about it. We know how to sell it. We may be able to integrate it as part of a proof of concept, but when it comes to actual implementation on a large scale, that is somebody else's skill set. And that should be part of the implementations team or the professional services team to come in and take a look and say, this is what we need to do. This is the scope of work that we are going to have to actually go through to achieve the goals that the customer is trying to achieve. If you have an SE who has to do the scoping, stop it, pass it on to the professional services. And that doesn't matter if it's a small team, a big team, a startup, a conglomerate. Bigger companies, that's how they usually do it. Professional services teams are involved in the scoping of professional services work. Because if you leave it to the SE, there will be mistakes. Professional services will be pissed off. Customer will be pissed off. So it's in your best interest to have someone who actually does the work come in and take a look at the work that needs to be done. And this segues very well into the handoff process. I used to work as a network design engineer. What happens is sales team sells a bunch of equipment. They have chats with customers about how they can design the network. And then our services are sold. The implementations or the professional services or the network design services are sold. And they get us involved, or they don't. They tell us, hey, we sold this, design it. And I have no idea what was sold. I take a look at some documentation, which is never enough, and I try to understand what was sold to the customer, what promises were made, what problems they're trying to solve. And then I have to design from scratch. What ends up happening is I have to go through the entire discovery process all over again with the sales team and customers to understand what I'm trying to solve. And so then I design for them, a network design. But all this could have been avoided. I could have been done way earlier. That's a big part of handing over from pre-sales to implementations and even post-sales or customer success. There needs to be a system, whether it's through documentation, whether it's through handoff meetings, whether it's the customer success team gets involved early if you have one, or maybe the sales team continues the relationship with the customer after the sale and they're responsible for renewals and all that stuff as well. Again, each company will have its own way to do things. each founder, each CEO, each sales leader will have their own preferences. Some people prefer salespeople who hunt and others that farm. And some companies prefer sales teams that do, like the salesperson to do both. They hunt for new opportunities, but they also farm their territory. And I guess think about it or come and talk to us. And that brings me to the sixth topic to discuss when it comes to the pre-sales process, which is post-sales process. I know it's counterintuitive. Some companies like to have their SEs involved in the post-sales. I think that's a good idea, especially if you maintain relationships with customers. It's mainly useful for enterprise customers. So if you have small to medium businesses, it's transactional. You're just moving on from one to the other. The sales engineer doesn't really need to be involved in the post-sales part. But if you have enterprise customers, that means these are the same customers you're going to work with for a very long period of time. It's in the team's best interest to make sure that the customer is happy and to have continuity between pre-sales and post-sales. What is the process? Is the customer going to contact support immediately, or are they going to contact the sales team or the sales engineer, who can then either open a ticket or go on site, try to figure stuff out? It is very dependent on the company you work for and the customer you're trying to get to. What is the ideal process for you? Again, not one size fits all. I've worked with some companies in the same industry that have a person dedicated for post-sales, the field engineers that are dedicated for post-sales, and others that don't, that have the sales engineer. The issue there that you might want to consider is when hiring a sales engineer, what are the skills you're hiring for? Are you hiring for pre-sales or post-sales? Because you're not going to find one that does both very well. SEs are either great at pre-sales or great at post-sales, but SEs that are great at pre-sales know how to manage a post-sales situation. If the customer calls us, says, hey, we have an issue, we know how to open a ticket, we know how to manage it, we know how to make sure that the customer issue gets resolved and the customer is happy in the end. Post-sales engineers, I guess, sales engineers hired for post-sales skills try to do the job themselves. They don't get support involved as often as they should, and they also lack the pre-sales skills. So just be careful of that. I guess that's a PSA for anyone looking to hire a sales engineer. What are you hiring for? What are the skills you're looking for? Number 7, marketing assistants. Sales engineers is not marketing, but I mentioned in the previous video, a lot of sales engineers would be great at marketing because they work with individuals, they work with customers. They know the stories, they know what stories to share, they know how to tell the story, whichever company you are, whether you're a startup, large company, or anywhere in between. What do you want your SEs to do when it comes to the marketing process? Do you want them involved in webinars? A lot of companies I've seen, they just use their SEs whenever there's a trade show or a conference. They send an SE, they give them a booth. Here, sit there for 3 days, do the same demo over and over, talk to people. And that's the most basic of what SEs can do. SEs can do webinars. SEs can do blogs, videos. We can be out there working more to help customers understand how we can help them. That's something to consider as well. Last point I want to talk about is relevant to all these points, the prioritization process. As sales engineers, we're bombarded with customer requests, RFPs, salespeople requests, marketing assistance help, basically everything that I've mentioned today. Every SE would prioritize differently. The question is, when your company is trying to achieve a goal, you don't want every SE prioritizing differently. Even if you have one SE, you don't want the SE prioritizing differently every time. There has to be some form of process or idea. This is the goal we want to achieve. And in order to achieve that goal, this is the priority, which, for example, discovery calls are the priority, or demos are the priority. So anything that comes as a post-sales call is not a priority, gets pushed to the back. The SE can open a ticket and then someone else from the team would support. Or a trade show is coming up. But the goal is to not get leads, to close the leads that we have. So then the SE has to go on the discovery on the demo part. But let's say you're in a world where you need more leads. Can someone else help the salesperson with the discovery call? Should the SE be on those marketing activities? These are questions that I cannot answer for you. You're going to have to answer. If you get the answers to all the questions, all the thoughts, the processes that I came up with, that I mentioned earlier, you'll be able to figure out what the SE is going to do on the back end. And notice that most of what I just mentioned, if not all, has nothing to do with the sales cycle in itself or customer-facing activity. All this is in the back end, things that are invisible to the customer, which means these are things that most people don't even think about because they're not customer-facing. So I just wanted to mention those. Now, if you like this video, if you thought it was useful, make sure to share, like, and subscribe. If you work for a company that doesn't have any of these processes, maybe you should reach out to us. We should chat. And if you do, I'm very happy to hear that. You should also reach out because I want to learn more from you. And that's it for today. With that, get back to work. Peace.